Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our second live lounge with the Cowley brothers. This afternoon, we're here. Please say hi. Please ask Danny and Nicky your questions. Hi, we're already saying hi already. Thank you, Niall. You've got this absolutely nailed. Niall is from Lincoln Christ Hospital School, and I think from memory last week you were actually from Kexby in Lincolnshire as well, so that's amazing. Please tell us where you're calling, where you're watching from, tell us which school you're at, and ask the questions. This afternoon, just as a recap really, Danny and Nicky have a career that has started with PE, being PE teachers, moved to be managers at Lincoln City, moved from there to Huddersfield, and can currently be seen quite regularly as football pundits on Sky Sports. Today we are fortunate to have them here, and they are going to share with us some of their sports science background. So we've got 2 weeks of sports science. This is very much about getting the performance of our players, be that sports person or that sports team. With us today we have Dr. Sandy Wilmot. Sandy is an absolute expert in the field of sports science and is one of our lecturers here at the School of Sports and Exercise Science. I'm going to keep quiet now, and please ask your questions, and we will interact throughout the session, and we will ensure that we get as many answers for your questions. So Sandy, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Emma. Hello everyone. My name is Sandy Wilmot, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Sport and Exercise Science. And I'm delighted to welcome Danny and Nicky back this afternoon for their second live lounge. And good afternoon to you both. And thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having us.
I'm particularly pleased that we have so many young people in the audience today, because I remember a conversation we had on your first visit to our Human Performance Centre soon after you arrived in Lincoln. And Danny, I remember you mentioning that one of the things that attracted you to Lincoln was the opportunity to work with young people and get students involved. And we've been very fortunate to be able to continue to develop those links and actually include internships where our students have got a chance to make genuine contributions to the club whilst gaining experience and also receiving mentoring from those with knowledge of professional football. So last week with colleagues from the Lincoln International Business School, you were discussing how to build an organizational culture that would facilitate success. And today what I wanted to do was take a step closer to the pitch, the court, the track, or the climbing wall, whatever your activity, and explore some of the factors that affect performance. Now, working in a School of Sport and Exercise Science, as I do, I get to see all the different perspectives from which sport can be studied. So sports science, strength and conditioning, sports therapy, all the way through to coaching, physical education, and even sociological and cultural aspects. And I was wondering whether you might be able to just give us a taste of some of the diversity of factors that you need to consider and integrate within professional football, but also an idea of how you go about building and managing a team of staff to support you in that process.
Absolutely. I think when we first arrived at Lincoln City, obviously we picked up a club that had been relegated from the Football League. It'd been relegated for 5 years, finished 13th in the previous season, and very much it was an empty room when we first joined. We had very little support staff around us, and of course, you know, one of the best things that we did was to build a relationship with you guys, and it was our ambition really from the get-go to be able to do that. Learning and education is obviously something that's very important to us and a key process, and we were really keen to build a relationship and hopefully get to a place where we could access some of your third year students, offer them internships, be in a position where we could start to build what we call the team behind the team. And there is absolutely no doubt that we wouldn't have gone on to achieve the success that we have, and Lincoln City wouldn't continue the success if it hadn't have been for that relationship. And you know, I go back through the staff that we would have taken from you guys: Matt Page, Toby Ellis, come in as statisticians, Luke Jelly as a sports scientist, Kieran Walker come on the medical team and is now a chartered physiotherapist working with Lincoln City Academy, Harry Rosington, Liam Youngs in performance analysis. So many students, and what they all did, they all come with an energy and with fresh ideas. Nicky and I both have a sports science background, but we graduated in the early 2000s, and to have young, vibrant, enthusiastic people around us with fresh ideas was brilliant. And what we did as time unfolded, we got to a place where we had a lot of interns leading departments. Now, they had brilliant ideas and lots of enthusiasm. The one thing that they probably lacked was some experience. And what we tried to do is get some consultants in place, people like Ross Poyton, Jez George, who looked after departments, and ultimately we used their experience to guide the natural enthusiasm that our interns brought. And what's been great at Lincoln City now, those interns are now full-time members of staff at Lincoln City, and we were ultimately all really good for each other. I think when we look at performance, there is so many facets to performing on a match day, and we have a number of different provisions that support the first team and support the players. When you think about medical, you think about strength and conditioning, you think about obviously the academy, you think about performance analysis, you think about coaching. These are all really, really important parts of the provision that supports the first team. I'm not sure, Darren, if you could just put the first slide up for us, but this is ultimately how we see it, and these are all the different facets that support performance on a match day. I've alluded to some of them already, but certainly sports psychology has such a big part to play. And what Nicky and I are very respectful of is that we're not specialists in all of these fields. And wherever we can, if we can get specialist support to help the players to perform at their best, that is absolutely our main aim. I think what we've been able to do successfully is build that team behind the team and make sure that everybody feels valued. It's very much we're all cogs in the wheel. And that's ultimately how we see it. Nobody's more important than anybody else, but everybody plays a role. And there's no doubt that the team behind the team had as important role in winning the two leagues that we did and winning the Checkatrade Trophy as did our number 9 or our goalkeeper. And it's something that we believe really strongly in. Like I said, for us, it's always we like new ideas. We like the fresh approach, and we're always looking to try to learn and develop the environment for the players. And the whole aim always is to give the players the best possible chance of being successful.
Danny, I think it's also about trying to make the players feel when they arrive at training that they're walking into a really professional environment. And as Danny touched upon earlier, when we first arrived at Lincoln, that was something that was so exciting, that we was coming to a city, and it's a one club city, but we could actually, make a connection with the universities and try to, although we didn't have the finances or resources at the time to maybe give them the same facilities that what maybe a Manchester United would have, we still had time to try and create the most professional environment that we possibly could for the players. And I think that players nowadays are always aware of what other players are doing in their clubs, and they want to feel as that when they're arriving to your club that they're getting that competitive edge, and you're doing everything that you can, not only on the pitch but off the pitch as well, to prepare them for their performance.
Our aim is always to improve the players, and we know that if we can improve every individual by 5 to 10%, and that has a huge collective gain on the team. And really, these are all the provisions that we put in place when we arrived. And like Nicky said, we had to think outside the box. We didn't have finance at the time to be able to bring experienced staff in. We didn't always have facilities. We had to create relationships with David Lloyd, for example, the health club. We used their facilities for certainly the first 2 years. We use some of your facilities again in terms of the recovery and helping players to recover after games. So it was very much trying to pool all of our resources and create the best environment possible. What was interesting once Nicky and I went to Huddersfield is that we picked up a club that had recently been relegated out of the Premier League, and of course then you get so many staff, and it was a club that had an awful lot of staff. And if we're honest, previous to that, we'd worked quite lean and mean, so it'd always been a small number of staff with a real focus. We got to Huddersfield, it was a much bigger number of staff, and that became really interesting us to then be able to make sure that everybody felt valued, that we were able to have clear way of working operationally, but still opportunities within our week to move the departments forward strategically. And I think what we put in place really was just lieutenants. So we had John Iger, who at the time was head of performance. He would have overseen all of these areas, but then we had lieutenants. So Janssen Mourinho would have been our in charge of the performance analysis department. I mean, we'd have had 5 to 6 analysts at Huddersfield. We'd have had 3 physios, 2 masseuses, so an awful lot of staff. And then the challenge then for Nicky and I was to make sure that everybody felt valued and everybody felt part of the team, and that was what we tried to do. I think, Dan, if you move to the next slide, what we can show you or just share with you is just our periodization. So this very much would be a 1-game week for us. So if we were playing Saturday to Saturday, this is how our week would look like. What we try to do ultimately is create learning hits for the players. So Nicky and I talk around on-field coaching and off-field coaching. So, for example, on a Monday morning, we would expect the staff to arrive for 8 o'clock. The players would arrive later. They would arrive for 9:30. Certainly in that morning period, it's around planning. So the first meetings for us is always a game review. So we'd review the game from the weekend. We'd have already watched the game. All of the staff would have watched the game back. We then have that time, an hour on a Monday morning, to review the game. We then go into a coaching meeting to all of the coaching staff. And for Nicky and I, it's everybody's part of it, but it's all hands on deck. So if, for example, you are a sports scientist, you're not just involved in the warm-up, the pre-act and the warm-up. Once the session is in full running, you've got to drive the physical standards, and you're trying to get the physical returns from the players. I know you spend a lot of time, Nick, don't you, in the planning phase of each session, assigning all of the different roles to the different people within the department.
Yeah, I think that's what's so important, really, is that before you arrive each day, is that you sort of aware of it, of all of the problems, but you've got an answer, really, and can find the solutions. And we're not great lovers of people just calling out what the problems are. We always like to try to find solutions. That's kind of the key for us. But Danny and myself have spent some time, particularly from our PE teaching background, studying other sports as well. And these are my favourite weeks. The week that Danny's got up now, which is a 1-game week. I mean, normally in football, there's often three times that you're planning in a week. So sometimes the learning culture that you really want to try to drive forward is harder, because it becomes more of players just resting and recovering and playing games. Whereas when we've studied other sports, particularly rugby, we were really impressed with. And we spent some time actually in the first lockdown with speaking to Exeter Chiefs, didn't we, Danny? We spoke to them, and they gave us some fantastic insight as to how their operations work throughout a week, and really just how they review games, how they preview opposition, the analysis that they go through, how they hold their department meetings, how they communicate throughout the chain, and also players leading presentations, and that was fantastic to listen to. And I'm hopeful that football now is moving more towards that type of culture. In the past, maybe football players have been used to just being told what to do, but nowadays I feel that footballers are real students of the game, and are capable of offering really great insights tactically as well, and can play a real part in the process throughout the week. And everybody wants to feel important, and I think if we can empower the players to present their ideas to others, that can be a real benefit for our performance on the match day.
Yeah, I think that is our ambition, really, to get to the place where the players are really owning their performance. And to do that, they've got to have a clear understanding of their performance. And that's where all of our support staff come in. And that's where they become so important as specialists in their area. So our sports scientists to really not to use the numbers. So, for example, if it's GPS data, so that the players actually understand what the numbers are representing, and putting the numbers into context. For example, we will always get the distance run and the high intensity running and the sprint, the number of sprints made and the sprint distance during games. But it's always trying to make sure the players understand what the numbers actually mean and what the numbers actually represent. Because on that game review meeting, the sports scientists would come in. So it would be Luke Jelly at Lincoln for us, or John Iger at Huddersfield. They would come in, they would tell us what the individual numbers look like. We would go through each player, we'd go through each department, but we would always put it into context. So, for example, if we were playing against a possession-based team, then we would only compare the numbers when we were playing against another possession-based team, because they can change so dramatically. And sometimes you could look at numbers and think, well, my centre midfielder's only run 11 kilometres here. Last week he ran 13 kilometres. What's gone wrong? But actually, the nature of the game, in that when he ran 11 kilometres, we actually had 70% possession and dominated the ball. When he ran 13k, actually we only had 30% possession, and we played against a possession-based team, and we were pressing in high up the pitch. So as a consequence, the numbers were dramatically big as well.
I think the data is very powerful in terms of informing our coaching as well. When we were able to, and we have some data engineers that worked for us both at Lincoln. Danny mentioned Matt and Toby were fantastic at providing us with this sort of information. How many, for example, throw-ons happen within a game? So if there's on average 40 throw-ons in a game, but that maybe 15 are happening in the middle third of the pitch, then that allows you as a coach to be able to find the right amount of dose in terms of restarting the play and where that location should be, as opposed to always practicing from a particular starting point. Normally, sometimes in coaching sessions, I see just the ball being played in on the ground, and quite often in football that it restarts from it restarts from particular places, like I mentioned, with 15 on average throw-ons coming from the middle third, or even when you look at the goalkeeper's possession. I think in a few of our Huddersfield matches, we realised that our goalkeeper was maybe having 15 or 16 back passes a game. So again, that informed us of something that we really needed to work on in our training, and making sure that when we did pass back to the goalkeeper, that we were able to cope with that particular situation. Whereas the goalkeeper sometimes starts many practices from the hands, and that's not often the case when you're playing actually in open play in the game situation.
That's great. Thank you both very much. That's really, I think, both useful context for the whole discussion, but also your first slide there, Danny, provided a framework for us that we can use for the remainder of the conversation. I should point out, because it was right at the top of your slide, was sports psychology. I did just want to note that we probably won't dwell on that too much this week. But that's only because it's so important that we have a whole session on that next week. So Danny and Nicky will be talking with my colleague Trish Chapman next week. So please make sure you don't miss that one. But I think if we come back to your framework that you had, I'm sure that everyone watching can see elements of that would relate to their own sport, whether they're working with others or whether they're looking to improve their own performance. But I'm also sure that as you think about that scenario, that may be either in a school setting or it may be in a grassroots setting. And I'm keen to come back to that later on. So please If you have questions that relate to other sports and school or grassroots, then please do pop those into the chat window, and that will give us a chance to come back to that later on. But before we do that, what I wanted to get back to a little bit was, as a sports scientist, I know that the interplay between data and the human side of it is very important. I'm a biomechanist, so data are my currency, whether they come from motion capture or assessment of strength. And I know that both of you are also very strong advocates of data, being, for example, early adopters of performance analysis, and actually even having to do your own coding at some point back in the past. So without asking you to give away any trade secrets, could you just tell us a little bit about how you use data?
Yeah, I think so. So for us, we're not governed by the data, but certainly we use it in a number of capacities. We've created a software package which basically understands our own performance. So Toby Ellis and Matt Page, who would have been your students, they actually applied for the sports science role, the internship initially. And when they come to interview, and Nicky and I said they don't quite fit what we're looking for in terms of a sports scientist, but they had these unbelievable entrepreneurial skills. And very much at the time it was get good people on the bus, and then we're finding their seat and find where they sit. And for us, Matt and Toby started showing real interest in statistics, and they were working for Football Manager at the time. So the idea was for us to firstly understand performance, and I think this is so critical. In order to improve performance, first you've got to understand it, whether that's the individual or the team. So we put together a package. It takes the boys still to this day 12 hours each to analyse each game, and it literally covers all of the different areas of our performance. What it then does, it then allows there's certain algorithms that give the players a mark out of 10 linked to their performance. So for example, if they're a centre half, they have key performance markers that's relevant to their position. If you're a centre forward, there would be different performance markers. But ultimately, it gives them a mark out, each individual mark out of 10, and then put all those marks together, give the team a mark out of 10. And it was just a really good way for us to start to understand our own performance. I think from there, we started to see correlations and patterns as to why we were winning, and on the odd occasion why maybe we come up short. And so we started to get a real clear idea of what was really important to us. And again, what that enabled us to do is go to the players and put development programs together to improve them individually as players. And then also it informed our training and our coaching and how we could improve the team as a collective. And it becomes so powerful to us that we were actually able now, we're at a place now that we can actually predict what's going to happen. I think in the last, the packages, the software packages evolved, but it's been sort of 5 years in the making. We're trying to get to a place where we've got some artificial intelligence, and it can actually tell us the result before it happens. That's for us. Winning is so important. So if we can get to a place where it's a science, is certainly our ideal.
What was great about working with Matt and Toby is that, you know, they were outstanding at firstly collecting the data, but then actually analysing it as well. And we spent hours and hours on end really to create real clear definitions so that we could all be aligned with the way that the football actions were being perceived. And still to this day, when we work with Matt and Toby, there are always grey areas in football about a definition of a particular action. So regular meetings after each game, always debriefing the match in terms of numbers, not only debriefing it subjectively, because there's lots of opinions around you subjectively. Everybody wants to make an opinion, but having some quantifiable numbers that maybe backed up some of our findings, we felt was really powerful in terms of showing the players to really provide evidence. And, you know, once the players started seeing that type of evidence, then they were much more, you know, inclined to listen to the numbers and to take that on board and realise that it would help them understand their own performance. But Matt and Toby were absolutely fantastic guys to work with.
the software package that we've created actually has evolved to now we use it for all of our recruitment as well. So now we're able to, when we're recruiting, we've got a clear understanding of the type of player that we're looking for because we understand our own performance. But also we can pick these players up that are playing in other teams. We can put them into our own team and see how they would perform in our own team. And that's been really good in terms of recruitment. It's in any organisation, it's always about people. So it's about 80% of the job. And I don't think you can ever eliminate the risk of recruitment, but you can certainly minimise the risk with detailed work. And that has helped us to do that.
I mean, when you're communicating as well, Danny, to Clive Nates, now the owner of Lincoln, for example, or Phil Hodgkinson at Huddersfield, if you're able to not only present an opinion, but also to back that up with the data, then as a consequence, that helps them with the decisions that ultimately have to be made in terms of whether you're gonna spend that finance or not on a particular player. But it does give you a much greater chance of being successsul with the recruit if you've got that type of information.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And thanks very much for that. And so I was just to say, I entirely agree about the importance of getting buy-in from the players when you're using data. Emma, sorry, I'll leave you.
Sorry,
you have a question to share.
We've now got some questions, thankfully. So thank you for everyone that's sort of come in with your questions. I will just take a couple of them now. We've got a big Lincoln fan who's from Burnley, so a big shout out to Paul. But we'll take George's question. How can your data be used to make important coach decisions? Yeah,
absolutely. For us, like I said, we're not governed by the data, but it definitely informs us and it allows us, it informs our planning. One, we get a real clear understanding of our performance, what it takes to win games, what are our priorities. So we go back to our game model. So for example, we like fast attacking football. We like it to be, it's a transitional way of playing so that we know that the transitional moments are really important. Our counter-attack, for example, is a crucial part of our work. So certainly we look at when we're planning the training week, the diet is heavily based towards transitions. I think you look at as a manager, you have so much data around you, and I think the key is to be able to select what data is important to you. And again, it goes back to the understanding of and putting the data into actual context, and I think that is the crucial part of it. But certainly, Nicky alluded to knowing that if, for example, our goalkeeper has 20 possessions during a game, but 15 of those possessions are actually back passes, 3 of those possessions are from goal kicks, 2 of those possessions are out of his hands, then when we're dosing the training, we can dose it accordingly so that we're making sure that we're best preparing the group to be able to perform on a match day.
I think it allows us as well, from a coaching perspective, we love to constrain our practices. So if we know that 84% of goals are scored with a 1 or 2 touch finish inside the 12-yard box, then that's something that we can really reward in training. They might be worth double goals, for an example. And as a consequence of that, you really start to influence the players' behaviours whilst training within a game, and they could almost start to perform these behaviours without actually really knowing that they're doing it. Other examples might be that if we wanted to be good on the transition, we might put in a constraint like you must score before the 5th pass. That encourages players to be that bit more direct and forward thinking, a bit more aggressive in their actions in terms of going straight to the goal as opposed to choosing a slow build-up possession. But it really does depend upon what you're going after with your team, and what you must have is a great clarity of your game idea and make sure that everybody understands that and ultimately wants to buy into that.
On a Monday morning, what we always try to do with our players, so they will always get their clips on a Monday morning, so they're able to watch their own individual clips of their performance before we go into a team meeting. What they also get is their we call it the gaming numbers, so they get all of their stats, so they're able to then see how they did an aerial challenge, how they did in 1v1 defending moments, what was their possession stats, short pass, medium pass, long pass, whatever it may be. But they start to get a real gauge of their own performance, and then of course naturally they want to compare with the other player playing in their position, or they want to compare against their own stats. And we very much try to create that culture of trying to compete against yourself and be the best version of yourself.
I think what also is interesting about that is that, like, there's three major areas that we're always going after really with the players. You've got the technical and tactical side of the game, you've got the physical side of the game, and you've got the mental side of the game as well. And if we're able to have this data to hand, we can actually see that if certain actions were negative in a particular moment, it might have been because the player was suffering disappointment. It might have been a psychological reason. It might have been a physical reason that he was fatigued that particular minute of the game. So we're always looking for answers, really. And I guess once you have all those answers, then you feel really confident of approaching the group and finding a way forward.
Can I just take one more question? But we've got Miles, who's very keen that he passes on his CV to you because he's a budding sports scientist with the Phoenix Club. So, and we will take Ben's question. How do you base your starting lineups on match day around the data collected in training sessions? So it's sort of flipping back the conversation really that you've sort of had analysing match day, but also how you look at that during training, I guess. And then I'll hand back to you.
No, of course. I think this is why we love data, because often as a manager, you're making tough decisions, and they're tight decisions, and sometimes there's very little difference between two players, and sometimes we'll go back to the statistics to actually make that final decision. And what we can do then, if there's two players where there's very little between, we can actually go back and look at the stats, and maybe at the weekend we're playing Crystal Palace, who are counter-attack based teams. We can go back to their performance against counter-attack teams, and we can see how they performed. And sometimes it's fine margins. And I think what you can also then do, because what's so important is that you communicate well to the players and to the group, so that if you are leaving the player out, then you're giving a justification and a reason, and you're also supporting it with evidence. And sometimes the data can be used in for that purpose as well. And while the player might not like what you're telling them, the fact that you're giving them a clear reason backed up with evidence, and you're also giving them a way forward to improve and hopefully getting the team in future games, I think they leave with a positive mindset.
I think a lot of factors you're considering the opposition as well, aren't you, in your matchups, and the profile of who that person's going to be playing against, and how his particular strengths might be able to help you against the opponent's weaknesses, or how their strengths might make you suffer in that moment. And these calls are often, very, very close ones. I think being able to look at the numbers in terms of how each player individually is performing over a longer period of time, it gives you a great advantage as well, because you understand that football is very periodic, and how players sometimes play at the start of the season. They might have very high numbers, and then when the winter comes, you might see that particular player suffering a dip, and he might start dropping below his threshold. So you can start to see these patterns and these trends, and then that gives you an opportunity to plan for that.
Thank you. And I think if I could just pick on two things there that you identified, that whilst the numbers are very valuable, you are dealing with people. So these are decisions made by people about people. But also, and this came up in Andres's question, so thank you, Andres, that we're dealing with individuals with very different backgrounds. So I think that's a huge element. And we've spoken before about whether those decisions become data driven or data informed. And I know you're coming down on the data informed side. And I also if you could just briefly talk about, you are very careful about who is the one who sometimes conveys the message about the decision. You could talk about finding the right person for that interpersonal relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have, for us, we all interact with people differently, don't we? And you know, within the group, you'll have some people that you have more of a connection with than others. That's just human nature. So we're always looking for the who influences the player the most. I think that's something that's really important to us. Normally, ultimately, my role is to give the bad news, and then. But it's then making sure that the person around the player and is supporting the player in that difficult moment is there and available to them, because it's one thing having all this wonderful data around you, but it's actually, are you using it to optimize performance? Now, in order to optimize performance, firstly you've got to understand it, and then once you get a clear understanding of that of the data, then you can really affect the individual. But ultimately, absolutely, the way it's communicated is really important. Actually, Nicky and I, we talk a lot, don't we, around our statistics program creates a number. There's an algorithm that creates a mark out of 10. Now, we don't show all the players that all the time because some players actually really benefit. So back at Lincoln, we had Michael Boswick and Jason Shackle, our two centre-halves. They were both, Bosby was 33, Jason Shackle was 35. Coming towards the end of their careers, had brilliant careers, incredibly competitive, wanted to know their numbers every week, would go through their numbers with a fine-tooth comb, and they would compete against each other. They were both centre-halves, but they were literally competing against each other who could get that highest mark, and it really helped them. However, we had other players that almost it didn't like that fine detail and didn't like the information. It actually impinged on their performance. So it is very important to know the individual.
I think a lot of that as well comes down to the planning before the day begins. As Danny said, there's certain individuals that you connect with maybe more than, and we also have other coaches as well that work with us. Sometimes me and Danny are conscious of sounding similar or sending the same type of message, so we might look to use other coaches to have these specific meetings with players as well. But I guess that what you're trying to do is really connect with the person firstly, because the more layers that you can build together and the stronger that connection is, the more they're looking forward to listening to the conversations, and they know that you're on their side and you really want to help them. So any sort of conversation or information that you give them, they know is for their best interest, and ultimately you've got their best performance at heart ultimately, and that's the key really for me.
Darren, can you just put the IDP slide up for me? Because this is just something that we use with our players. For us, every single player, it doesn't matter if they're 17, 18 or they're 35. Our ambition is to make everybody better. So we try to get the players to own this. It's an individual development program. Ultimately, I'm looking for a better name for it. So if anyone's got a better name for it, please comment and add, because we call it an IDP. I'm not too keen on that, if I'm honest. But this was Christopher Schindler, so he would have been our captain. Now I've taken some of the confidential information out for obvious reasons. The personal information you can see on the left-hand side. There's eight parts to this development program. Now, each department looks after their own slide. So, for example, the coaching department would look after the training and the positional specific characteristics slide. Our sports psychology department would look after the psychological side, so on and so forth. If you were just to go to, so if you went to the PSC slide for me, please, Darren. So this is positional specific characteristics. Go on. Yeah, so the PSC's ones, thank you. If we can get to that. Go. And a few technical issues, but basically the positional specific characteristics slide, what that does, so each position has certain specific characteristics that we look for in our players. So they're key characteristics that we look for in a centre half. So Christopher Schindler was a centre half. These were the 10 things that were really important to him. Now, he gave himself a mark with our support for each of these 10 areas. we would then look to see where he needed to improve technically and tactically. And what we enjoy about these is, so for our young players, they're able to see where. So we would have had Romani Edmonds-Green, who would have been Christopher Schindler's understudy at Huddersfield. He would have been able to see where the player in his position was for each of these different areas. So if it had been defending direct play, for example, Christopher was a 5. His 1v1 defending was a key strength of his. That would have been a 7. And Romani would have been able to compare his marks and see where he needed to improve. Now, what we like about this is that the support team all have a role in trying to improve not only the team performance but the individual performances. But ultimately, it's owned by Christopher. And then if we go to the last slide, which is the targets, from all of this information, we're able to set targets for Christopher. And we work really, so Nicky had a key influence with Chris. They had a really good relationship. And Nicky would meet with him every 6 weeks, ultimately. So they would meet every 6 weeks and they would just go through the action plan. Right, what we're focusing on, where's the areas of improvement. We would highlight what they would be, and then whenever we had individual time on the grass, we would focus on them, and that then as a consequence, the players would start to see improvements. And furthermore, we would actually, so someone like Christopher, who was one of our experienced players, he would actually look after Romani's IDP. So he would actually be in charge of that and responsible for that. And we found it to be a really nice social dynamic, because eventually what happened is when the young players come in the first team, because the senior players have been looking after their development, the senior players were really protective of the younger players and really nurtured and helped them, in, especially when they were having difficult moments in games. And it was certainly good for the dynamic of the group. This would have just been, this slide here would have just been Christopher's development plan. So this would have been over a 6-week cycle, the 3 things that he was working on. So you can see, if I just take the first one, 1v1 defending, for example, then what type of drills we were going to focus on.
I think that's the key with an experienced player like Christopher, like Jason Shackle or Michael Boswick, is as a coach, when you're able to then show him the ideas that you're going to use to try to improve in these areas, he's able then to have his opinion as well in that one-on-one meeting, and he can take some ownership over what that process is going to look like in terms of making the significant gains in the areas that he needs to.
Yeah, so this would have been Christopher. He would have put this together, obviously with our support, and we would have talked around it, but certainly he would have owned this, and he would have got to this through hopefully all of the clips that he saw of his own performance, from the statistical data, and from all that work on understanding his own performance. Because what's very important, because the amount of games, particularly when you're in League 2, League 1, the Championship, it's a 46-game season. You only have so much time on the grass with the players. So creating off-field coaching and creating learning hits off the field is so important to the players' development.
Especially in the 2 or 3 game week periods, you have to try and maximise the time that you have and think differently about how you're going to develop, particularly the players that are starting in a lot of the matches. It's ideal to do some off-field work during that period of time.
Thank you. Emma, do I have time for one more quick question?
You certainly do, Sander. Yeah, we'll take a question from you and then we'll take one from the audience before we finish.
Thank you, Emma. You've been emphasising throughout, and you obviously brought up Christopher Schindler's example there, the individual. The other individual that I would just like to discuss briefly with you is the sports scientist. So for budding sports scientists like Miles we have in the audience, we emphasise to our students that having all the technical knowledge is vital. How to use the technology, how to interpret technology, but also the other side of it, the human side, so the people call it soft skills, craft skills, is also really important. So you don't go into a club and damage the culture or the coach-player relationship's already there. So would you have any advice for both people on the 2 sides of that relationship, the coach and the sports scientist, about how they can go about making that most productive and kind of most mutually beneficial? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Miles Wheatley, I believe, is an ex-Fitzwymark pupil who we'd have taught Miles at our previous school. I'm pretty sure it is him. He was a fantastic sportsman, and great to see now he's a sports scientist. So it's a unique name. I'm presuming that's the Miles we're talking about.
A great rugby player as well.
Very good, yeah, very good. A good year group actually. Yeah, going back to your question, I think we always like solutions. So I think sometimes you can get staff that keep coming to you with problem after problem after problem. For us, it's always come to us with problems. Ultimately, they're the easy bits to find. The harder bits to find are solutions. So can you come with solutions? Can you come with answers? We like energy and enthusiasm. We like to have an agree to disagree culture. We never like people who just say yes and agree with everything. If if we're going to make change, and this is something really important, we only make change if we're going to get significant gain. So we don't make change for change's sake. So if we are going to make change, then question it, challenging it, because we want to know it's right. Because if we are going to go ahead with this, then we're going to really commit to it. And it needs everybody to commit to it. And certainly for Nicky and I, there's no right way. If there was a right way, then ultimately we'd all be doing it the same. So I think it's to try to find the best way of working within your way, and within the environment that you're working out, with the facilities that you have. But certainly to keep, I like to keep pushing the barriers. I like to keep trying to improve. This is, I look at how far performance and the support provisions around performance has moved in 10 years. So if I think back to when I was at Concord Rangers in 2010 to where it is today, and Nicky and I have actually been doing a little bit of work recently on where we think football will be in 2030, because if you can get ahead of the curve, then that certainly puts you in a strong position. But yeah, come with solutions, bring energy, bring enthusiasm, be brave, be willing to voice your opinion, make sure you've got evidence to back it up, support it. But no,
that's what I was going to touch on, Danny, is just the communication, really, having the confidence to be able to communicate your ideas, but also putting it across in a way that's accessible for everybody in the room. Because quite often the scientists can have fantastic vocabulary and understanding of all of the terms, and you just need to make sure that the novice in the room can understand the points that you're trying to raise. Also, just as well, a process that we had at Lincoln and Huddersfield, Dan, was just a weekly email of the numbers, didn't we? Regularly we'd want to see everybody's numbers from all of the training sessions, but also the match as well, just so that you can communicate up and down the chain, really well.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Shall we just take? We've got a suggestion for your players plan as a players performance plan from Paul Crompton, the Triple P. So that's one of the ideas that we can. I think he's a City fan from Burnley at the moment. But what we will do is we will just take one last question from Niall. Niall, I think we've sort of touched on it a little bit, because you did sort of answer some of the questions. And I know when we had a discussion yesterday with you, Nicky, we were talking about, the different body composition of players and things like that. But Niall has asked, do you see similarities in the older players than the younger players? So like experience affecting their DT?
Yeah, I think so. I think, before you plan your training session, what you have to understand is that everybody's individually different and what their needs are ultimately. And sometimes before you start to plan, you have to be aware of not only age, but also the amount of minutes that each player's played and what sort of impact that will have on your session. I mean, at Lincoln, with some of the senior players, sometimes we'd work more of a 50% rule. So the players would actually do 50% of the content, and then the planning and the logistics of that we had to make sure that we were maintaining a rhythm in those players' training sessions, because what we didn't want the players to do is to do an exercise and then stop, let their muscles get cold, and then restart their engines again. So a lot of planning has to take place for that to be able to work for the athlete. But we had some fantastic success at Lincoln with some senior players, and particularly like Neil Eardley, Danny would spring to my mind, who had suffered a lot of injuries before arriving to us. As a consequence of his background, we were probably able to pick Neil up, at really good value at that time. And he had a fantastic career at Lincoln and was really valuable in the success that we had, and played a huge part.
Yeah, I think what we always aim to do with our medical team, our sports science team, we like them to be really proactive. So rather than be reactive when you get an injury and reacting to it and then having to rehab that, it's about understanding the bodies, knowing how they move biomechanically, knowing what they might be predisposed to, and making sure that you put in conditioning work that hopefully stops them picking up the injuries that they could be predisposed to.
Having the live data as well during training sessions was huge for us. We didn't have the benefit of that in the first season when we was in the National League, but once we'd won enough games of football to be able to afford the GPS, Harry Rossington, who was working with us at Lincoln, he played such a significant role in being able to, with Luke Jelly, provide us with that information that we needed during the session, so that we knew if we wanted to hit the accelerator with a particular player, or if we wanted to put the brakes on, we had that sort of data there to help us make that informed decision.
Yeah, I think for us, it's what we've been able to do now is put a coaching curriculum together where all of our drills, we know exactly how much load is going to be taken from the players linked to each drill. So we've got a really good understanding of where we're at, and that's only come through the time and the experience. But now we could do, for example, if we were doing a 4v4 +3 rondo, we would do it for 2.5 minutes. We would know that would be around 600 meters of load for the players. So that ultimately is why our planning meetings normally last for every hour that we're on the grass. It's about 10 hours worth of planning, but ultimately that is the detail that you need to put in place if you are going to make every single player better in each and every session, and that is always our aim.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to have to wrap up now. I mean, it's been fascinating sort of conversation. I mean, anybody that's currently sort of studying sports science at GCSE or A-level and considering sort of the next step into sports science, I think, some of the things I've sort of taken away from it is you sort of need to be a mathematician, a computer whiz, and sort of have a bit of social skills as well. So it's a whole package, and there's certainly a whole host of careers and employability out there in sports science world, for sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sandy, for sort of hosting this afternoon. I've been absolutely fascinated by it, and really thankful again to yourself, Danny and Nicky. Fantastic sort of session. I think no matter what sport you follow, football is such a base that we can sort of follow with everything, really. Just as a final sort of couple of things from me, tomorrow, if you are considering that actually sports science as a degree is something that you would be interested in, then please come to our open evening, which is virtual, and click onto our website. Darren, thankfully, has put all of those details there, 4 till 6 tomorrow. And you can meet some more of our sort of colleagues tomorrow about sports science. And next week is, I will allow Sandy to sort of let you know exactly what that is about, but it is about sports psychology next week, Sandy, isn't it?
It is, yes. So we're with my colleague Trish Jackman, and I think she'll be wanting to explore a range of kind of contemporary topics in psychology relating both to performance and to well-being.
Very, very key points. Thank you so much again, Danny and Nicky, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.